think everybody says, you know what, it's way too nice to be inside today. I think that's what people are thinking. So hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us, whether you're here or watching recording. Just as a reminder, since this is not an official council business meeting, the discussion today is not going to represent final discussion or decision, excuse me, of the council. And Rhonda, Co-Chair Fritz, sends her regrets in having a conflict today. So it'll be me facilitating today, and I look forward to engaging with you. So what we're going to start doing today is really talking about implementation. Again, not making decisions, but just talking about it. So our objectives in today's meeting here are really to review the public and EPP feedback on standards with this emphasis on re-reviewing feedback and how it informs implementation. So things like timing, scope, scale, infrastructure needed to make sure all these great standards we worked on actually get implemented. And then our next piece that we're going to do is review and discuss some of these different implementation options to address the feedback, and we'll have some small groups to do that. And then we're going to decide what to share with the full council at the May 20th meeting from all this conversation that we've had. So with that, you're going to recall that we had this process of providing our January draft to the public and the educator preparation programs for input. Some of that feedback pertained to the EPP standards, some pertain to implementation. And again, the focus of today is that latter, that implementation piece. So of the 75 responses we received and were synthesized so well by our staff and presented to the council or council earlier this year, about half of the responses, just as a reminder, came from those EPPs. So I'm going to hand it off to Kristen Rush from TSBC and Ken Greenbaum from ODE to help refresh our memories on the core themes around implementation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Co-Chair Gardner. So yeah, as Co-Chair Gardner just framed, we received feedback early this year around the EPP standards, and you can see almost 2/3 of the feedback received was around implementation. And of these kind of 4 themes that all the feedback was kind of categorized into, 2 of them really spoke to implementation, support for educator preparation and broad systemic needs. And so what we'll do now is I'm going to pass it over to Kristen to kind of speak through 2 of those themes. One emerged, and just to kind of refresh our memories, we never really dove deep into this part of this feedback. We were more in the content part of the feedback. So yeah, I'll turn it over to Kristen now to dive deep into those 2 themes.
Yeah, so that first theme that Ken highlighted was this support for educator preparation programs. And so any public comment that was really categorized as, wondering about how EPPs were going to be supported, how faculty were going to develop their skills, comments about kind of the scope of the standards, the relevant endorsements, depth and breadth, and then kind of questioning what the standards are going to look like in action within programs was all categorized into theme 1 here, which is support for EPPs. So of the 77 total comments, 68 of them included some content around how are we supporting EPPs through implementation, with some sample sentiments here at the bottom, just kind of wondering about best ways to support educator preparation. And then theme 4 really gets categorized as broad systemic needs. And so any comments concerning the handoff from pre-service to in-service, wondering about modifying it, other endorsement areas, wondering about adding endorsement areas, barriers to licensure, and then just kind of the scope of the council and how the higher education system is going to interface with the K-12 system. These all got kind of summarized into broad systemic needs, and 55 responses included some sort of content around broad systemic needs. And so some sample sentiments below here, including that kind of disconnect between higher education and K-12 and how to support that bridge. Some questioning around how we're licensing dual language instructors, and then kind of wondering about a phased implementation approach as folks leave educator preparation and enter the K-12 system. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it back off to Chair Gardner.
You are, sorry, I was chewing.
No
I had a
problem.
double duty today. So thank you so much for that refresher. So I'm gonna now hand it off to Pooja, who's gonna share an overview of the implementation options that have been informed both by that feedback and by agency leaders who are experienced on implementing all of the mini standards that we have here in Oregon.
Great, thank you. So I just want to recognize the agency leaders on our call who really helped to inform a framework of some options to just get us started with something to react to. We're really eager to present this to you because we think you'll have really good feedback on what you want to see in the full council meeting on the 20th, what we need to bring to them. A couple of foundational questions I think that we need to explore is how soon should these new standards be implemented? What does rollout actually look like in order to be effective? I think what we've heard from you all is we don't just want words on paper, we want teeth, and teeth also looks like making sure that we're creating the high quality implementation conditions for everybody to be successful in this. There's a lot of examples to point to around when we often hit go at the state, but we haven't actually created the systems to make sure that go results in really high quality outcomes. And so we really, really want to make sure that we're setting up everybody up for success, because we're really all into this together to make sure we're doing what's right for kids. So this is really a critical conversation around implementation from Governor Kotek's perspective, because things go right or wrong in implementation. And she's really encouraged this body to be really thoughtful about how the new standards that you adopted roll out. So I think this is really just sorry, go back to one slide. Thanks, Kristen. So there's kind of 4 different chunks of work in implementation as the way that the agency staff team kind of prepared them. One is around when do the expectations become effective? And so there's options for you to consider, and we'll have time in the breakouts to kick back and forth. Another question is around what is the support that we need to provide to the educator prep institutions themselves to meet these new kind of expectations and standards? And then what's the support that we need educators to receive in order to meet the new standards? And then how do we create the right infrastructure and investments to create the high quality conditions for everybody to be successful? So those are kind of the 4 big buckets, and the Google Doc that is linked in what we sent to you all yesterday has kind of a few page overview of that. Next slide. And so there's 2 different options to roll out, and I'll let Kristen to share a little bit about this.
Yeah, so just to be clear, like we're not having the council choose between these 2 options. They're kind of on a spectrum of availability of strategies. And so option A is kind of traditionally what TSPC does to roll out standards. This is kind of our typical process. So looking at phase 1, in this case would be 2024 to 2025, is really capacity building for educator preparation programs, allowing EPPs to really absorb the standards, look internally in their programs, identify key faculty, do their own curriculum mapping, update their syllabi, and sort of kind of do some internal planning and capacity building with TSPC support as needed. In a typical situation where we're rolling out standards, TSPC serves in sort of an advisory capacity, engaging EPPs as needed as they're doing their own sort of capacity building. And then in this model, they start looking at program redesign. This goes through a series of kind of phased processes within EPPs as well. They have to get approval for program changes. kind of internally, and then coming back to TSPC if program modifications are necessary. So reporting to us any sort of major or minor modifications to their programs. And again, TSPC sort of standing by in an advisory capacity. And then finally, phase 3 is where EPPs submit evidence that says that their program is aligned with the standards, and TSPC reviews those programs to ensure alignment. And so if they're in compliance, the EPP would follow its regular 7-year review cycle. And if not, the EPP would submit that program modification proposal, and they would do a 2-year focused program review with TSPC. And this aligns with the overview that Wayne gave kind of in the fall or winter of last year. Option B, again, on a continuum here. And so it's not just kind of categorically option A or option B. It's sort of a menu of choices here. Option B looks a lot like what the K-12 system does when they get new standards. And so looking here at phase 1, which is kind of assessing their capacity needs, doing some landscape mapping, designing their improvement systems, goal setting, and doing, kind of community of practice development to build, staff and faculty internal capacity. And then going into phase 2, which is developing a model for professional learning. This is where you get into kind of coaching, technical assistance, and really setting up teams that can, be collaborative and really guiding the process of standards adoption from like a grassroots sort of way. And then into phase 3, which gets into the program redesign and alignment with the new standards, which is similar to the TSPC process, where, either through technical assistance centers, through community of practice, EPPs can engage across programs and across institutions to really plan and design and implement program redesign in a really kind of thoughtful and systemic way. And then phase 4 is where the candidates, the educator candidates, actually experience that really deep knowledge of their faculty and experience the standards kind of live and in action on the ground through their training programs. So again, like not just 2 buckets, but just a menu of possibilities here, looking at what implementation may look like as we try to kind of use that public comment to really bridge the gap between higher education and what's happening in K-12.
Can I ask one question, Susan? Kristen, first of all, this was very well written. Thank you so much. Can you tell me on this one, the years that might go with these phases so we could compare the 2 in terms of implementation years?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's a question for this group. I don't think that that's a question that we're able to really answer. Though I'll hand it off to Pooja if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think we didn't, can you just go back 2 slides, Kristen? I just want to clarify, yep, that one. The 2 options that Kristen just walked through is related to this top bullet around when the timeline is for when they become effective. So the other parts of this have options built in. So we wanted to provide you with options on this one too, of just here's how we kind of traditionally do things and here's a different way to do it. But we didn't want to overbake this with very specific timelines because you really should be shaping kind of whatever structure you want. And we figured that in the small groups, you would kick around like, wow, this one doesn't make sense at all. But what if we do this and that? So we really wanted to just have this kind of generative conversation in the breakouts. And then there can be additional work in between today and the next meeting that we have on the 20th at your direction. So.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Kristen, what I really appreciated was the probability of not only having technical assistance, but pairing up with some of our ESDs, particularly the Northwest Regional ESD, which has a whole group of people with expertise in science of reading. That really would help the capacity building. But I can't see that in the 2 options you just gave us. I mean, did I miss it? I
I
can't hear
think it's
you.
in phase 2.
Yep,
I
sorry,
see.
phase 2, bullet 1, establishing technical assistance centers.
Ooh, right
and
there.
partnerships
Thank you.
with
I'm
EPPs.
so sorry. I was looking forward and didn't see it. Thank you so much. But I enjoyed reading this. Very thoughtful.
And I'm just wondering, before we get into breakouts and have some, I think, really helpful, meaningful, and rich discussion, if we could get just a bit of a background on some of the most recent implementation examples. So I'm thinking obviously of our dyslexia standards, but I'm also thinking about social emotional learning standards, because those have been, at least in my mind, the most recent, and how those have rolled out, just to give us maybe some context for how, some of us have seen it done.
Yeah, that's a good question. I can speak to SEL, but I can't speak to the other standards. Melissa, are you there? Are you able to speak to the rollout of new standards?
Yeah, yes, I'm here. Unfortunately, I also am unable to speak to the rollout of dyslexia standards at the EPP level. My familiarity would be at the K-12 level and what that looks like. So I think as we're having this discussion, the most pertinent is probably the approach we're taking with SEL.
Yeah, and I can speak a little bit to that. Our department, the educator preparation department within TSPC, is really trying to look more continuous improvement and capacity building than we are compliance. And so SEL was a really nice example of a partnership that we formed with ODE while they were developing their K-12 standards. And so our higher education standards are aligned directly with the ODE standards. And we are, so educator preparation had kind of 1 year to do capacity building, and is doing a lot of like internal curriculum mapping, syllabi updates, and things like that. But also we're running a teacher educator institute that's going to start this spring, where faculty at each of our EPPs were identified by their deans or other leaders to get some professional learning in kind of a culturally sustaining lens with which to look at social emotional learning, and is really focused on adult capacity building. And so we have that training coming this spring, and it's a 1-year institute for a handful of faculty to kind of engage in a community of practice with the folks that created the framework that we're using, that we use to adopt the standards. So again, like really looking at elevating the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the faculty to allow them to better embed and model the standards. Is that helpful, Susan?
I think that's super helpful, just for those of us maybe who aren't in EPPs and haven't seen it in action, kind of what one of these rollouts look like.
Okay, well, why don't we keep going a couple more slides here before we get you into breakouts. So what you're gonna do in breakouts is that you're gonna have a note taker there for you, so you don't have to take notes, but we do want you to choose a person from the actual council member, not staff, to report out to us when we come back to the full group. And in the conversation in step 2, we would love your kind of overall feedback on the slide, what you see on slide 12, the overall implementation framework. What do you like? What don't you like? What should be added or removed? And then specifically on those 2 options that we just went into detail about, which is related to the effective date, we really want you to go deep in that and to say, which one responds better to the public and the educator preparation program input and your expertise? And what would it look like if we wanted to create a hybrid of the best of all worlds? Again, this is not for decision, it's just for kicking around ideas and then kind of bringing back what synthesis you have from the group so that we can inform our next conversation. Next slide. So I just wanted to share, just again, we've talked a lot about why we're here and whatnot, but I want to just remind us about the vision for the Early Literacy Success Initiative, which is really grounded in consistency and alignment with the research that is also culturally responsive. And so what we're doing really in this council speaks to that third bullet that you see on the screen about really preparing educators. And of course, we're also have been talking about school administrators as well. The next slide. And that consistency point is really, really critical. And that's why the Oregon Early Literacy Framework has really been the linchpin and backbone of the implementation, both around how we centered it with the council's work, as well as how we have centered that with the legislation that passed last year on a bipartisan basis for House Bill 3198, which created the Early Literacy School Grant, grants to community and tribes, as well as birth through 5 strategies. And the intent is to have alignment to a set of consistent norms and practices stemming off of the early literacy framework. So the importance of sharing this in this moment is around, in order to achieve the goal around raising our outcomes for students and supporting the capacity of community leaders and community-based organizations, tribes, educators, school administrators, and educator preparation program faculty. All of that matters to keep the dots connected to get that consistency and the North Star. And so we just encourage you to keep thinking about this. And we really appreciate that. I think implementation has come up in probably every single meeting that we've had since last September. So this is not a new conversation. So is there any other slides, Kristen, on this section? Okay, and I think you know this all well and good by now, because you've seen this slide before about what the literacy framework is. So why don't we go back to the breakout instructions, and are there any questions before we put you into breakouts? Go ahead, Ken.
Just a small point of clarification. I believe this slide refers to slide 12 for the implementation framework. I think that's slide 8.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, good point.
Just for clarity. It's also
Yes.
in the pre-reading document as well.
And Ken and Kristen will be in each of your breakouts to be helpful and kind of helping to make sure that you know what the instructions are. So we will go ahead and open breakouts, and then we will do a check-in about 30 minutes in. We actually have us closing these breakouts at about 2:15 so that you have kind of plenty of time in the discussions. So, but we'll be checking in with the staff there. So let's open up breakouts. Again, we'll close close to 2:15. Do you see the prompt, Anita, or is there? Uh-oh, I can't hear you. Sorry. Room 2 is the room. It's not working. Oh, group two, you're ready already?
Yes, sorry, we just came back. I told folks 2:15 is when we'd reconvene.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. We'll just, because we told the other group, so I just want to make sure we don't miss them because I think they might be planning for 2:15. So we'll just have 5 more minutes and then we'll come back.
Perfect.
Thanks. All right. I think we can just, we'll come back if we've strayed away. Okay. Thanks, everybody. It looks like you've had some really rich discussion. I'm excited to hear. Before we just allow group 2 to share first, I just, my apologies, I should have introduced my new colleague in the governor's office, Rachel Mosier, who's the new education advisor. So Rachel, if you just want to say hello, so we all know.
Sure. Thanks, Pooja. Nice to meet you all. I got a chance to connect with group 2, but really nice to meet the full group as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, let's go to group 2. This was if you were with Ken, who wants to share?
The group did decide that every member was going to give a very brief, one breath kind of share of their learnings or takeaways. So whoever would like to start first.
So I like the option A because it's simple. 3 phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. But I also liked, and we discussed all the technical resources that would be available if we did option B, but it's good to have a simple one with technical assistance, experts from the state, professional materials, online materials for professors to learn more information collected from many states.
I completely agree with Dr. Archer about that. It'd be great to see option B with perhaps the sort of structure and dates interlaced for those activities. So I think that was my big takeaway about those 2 options.
I agree exactly with that too. The main thing that I talked about that sort of addresses number 2 and 3 questions of responding to what current educators need, and also helps with the need for the EPP, as I talked about, really hoping that districts can get out ahead of whatever the timeline is for requiring teachers to be recertified. And I shared a model that we're developing in my district, like in real time. I mean, literally, I think we met on Tuesday morning and hashed this out, where we're using a bulk of our state early literacy grant money to have a cohort per year for the next couple of years, where we will invite teachers to do an online asynchronous, actually it's Co-Chair Fritz's course out of Eastern Oregon University, and be enrolled in that distance, that online course, while I will be facilitating the cohort for in-person ongoing support and synthesis. So we're talked about that in terms of responding to a need for current educators, and also that helps the EPPs, hopefully by ensuring that we have some classrooms where, when these standards go into effect, the candidates doing their field experience have appropriate places where they can do their field experience with teachers who have this knowledge and training.
Excellent. Did we miss anybody? Rep Wright, did you want to share? Okay. Okay, so we're good. No other comments on that. Okay, great. And then let me ask a follow-up question in regards to kind of this, what I'm hearing is option 2. Let me just screen share for a moment. Here we go. So what I'm hearing is that, oh no, here we go, this one. So I just made a copy of this. So option 1 is kind of where there's more preference here on this particular question of effectiveness in general. Is that correct? Okay. Did you have any discussion kind of about the temperature for these other questions and options? Do these seem kind of on track, or was there any discussion about pros and cons of either? The focus was on the options on the first question. Is that correct, Ken?
We discussed both the
Okay.
framework and the options. I think there was a lot of different reflections on like what resonated about the framework and ideas in terms of like answering those questions.
Excellent. Okay. That's great.
We had a lot of excitement about all of the ideas for different ways to tap into expertise that's already here. And Dr. Archer also talked a lot about tapping into the work that's already been done in some of our in other states
Mm-hmm.
in order to save us from reinventing the wheel.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. All right. Is there multiple folks who want to share from group one?
I said that I would be the person to share out.
Excellent. Go ahead, Julie.
So I don't know if I'm going to be as concise as my friends on the other team, but we talked about having a sense of urgency and carrying that forward through what option A or B, whichever one is chosen, or I guess option 1 or 2. But people on EPPs tended to lean toward option A because of the familiarity that the structure offers. And they said that there's some concerns that EPPs have for the number of standards and just fitting it all in, and just unanswered questions that are still out there. Kristen talked about TSPC possibly being able to doing some mapping and alignment for EPPs to help support them through that. And there was an idea about possibly having some priority standards with a timeline so that could help structure EPPs through as they work to meet the standards, and that could possibly help them meet them in the middle. We talked a lot about the timeline for universities to make course changes it can be quite long, and just the bureaucratic process that happens at the state level and at the university level. Sometimes EPP faculty are not the fastest movers. And so helping people process through that and just supporting EPPs is going to be big. And then let's see. We talked about kind of the option 2 or B. We talked a little bit about like that ESD piece and how they can support schools and the systems for renewing licensure. We talked a little bit about how different programs are structured a little bit differently with like especially we talked about the administrative licensure programs, where some of those people who will be coming into those programs will be coming from an elementary experience and possibly having the early literacy coursework already done, but then there will be people that will be coming from secondary experiences and they won't have the early literacy coursework already done. And then Katie just mentioned that she thought that it would be a good idea to have this similar conversation with the larger group overall, just to kind of get some more feedback. And Susan talked about possibly being able to reach out to EPPs to get their thoughts about the implementation of option A and B.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Julie. Is there anybody else from that first group that wants to add anything? No? Great. Well, it sounds like you had a really rich discussion, and that overall, there's just, it seems like the options that were put in front of you were good options to kind of kick around, that in the question of when the standards are effective, that there seems to be more consensus of this group, although we're not voting, more around the first option that is more of a traditional rollout. I'm curious if there's any thoughts about what would make, do we want to have a similar conversation with the full council? Do we want to try to have a more narrow conversation related to implementation? What are the kinds of questions that you think we can build off of your conversation today for the full group? Any thoughts about that? Go ahead, Dr. Archer. I mean, you have to unmute.
All right, so Pooja, we resubmitted the standards, and I believe that probably someone is working on them being rewritten in common language but maintaining the essence. Do you know if we will have that before the meeting on the 20th, so that we are sure that that part is taken care of as we go into implementation?
That's a great question. I think the decision was to adopt the standards as they were when the council last met at the business meeting, with the caveat of the parking lot items that we all named and voted on in the last process. So, Alex, I don't know if you have the ability to share the link in the chat for the standards.
They needed we agreed that they needed standard language.
Correct. We did. Yes, the council did. And that was part of that's the TSPC process that they're going to be going through based on what you've put forward. So they are going to do a lot of that wordsmithing to make sure that they're in the correct format. So that's the TSPC process. Yeah. And that's not going to happen. Melissa, I don't know if you're still on the call, but you can remind us on the timeline trajectory for that work. It's this summer, I believe.
She
So
got
it's really
She got bumped off the call. I believe that we're trying to get the OAR itself through the public comment period that should open 6/1, with the idea that a lot of the wordsmithing and kind of public comment review will happen before an emergency July commission meeting.
So, Kristen, thank you. You always do such good work for us. Thanks.
All right. Well, Co-Chair Gardner, I can hand it over to you, but just to really appreciate the rich conversation today. Thank you.
Same. Thanks to everybody for making time, especially when it's so hard and it's so beautiful outside. So thank you. It sounds like we have some great points to bring back to the full council. And at that next meeting on the 20th, we will be digging further into that licensing discussion. And at our request, the staff has been working really hard on some research that they're going to review with us there. So